Hi, this is the module Views, Services and SLAs within DataMiner Configurator Level 1. And since it's the last module within Configurator Level 1, let's have a quick recap on what we have been covering so far. So Configurator Level 1, it's about building a DataMiner system, and one of the building blocks is elements. So we have been centering this level 1 around elements, because elements, the first thing we needed was connectors. So we looked at managing those connectors so that we could add our first element. And once we added our element to get that data into the DataMiner system, we started to configure it with some trend templates and alarm templates to define what we want to activate for trending and alarming. Now that we have added some elements on our DataMiner system, we can start building and growing our system, but we need to keep things organized. And that's where the last module comes into play. That's where we want to take a look at views, services, and SLAs. So with views, we can combine elements together into a view and build that hierarchical tree structure. With services, we can pimp them up to a service level and see the impact on the services that I'm delivering through my system. And potentially I can also track the availability if I attach an SLA to my services. So we'll be doing those three topics. We'll add a view to the system, we'll add a service to the system, and we'll add also an SLA to our service. So we'll be covering those three items and doing that in a demo with a small exercise. So first things first, that's taking a look at the views, and that's the most basic one of the three, you could say, because it's very simple. It's just a folder with a couple of elements in there. We already saw that in the surveyor module, where we see that hierarchical tree structure, so we can organize things by location, for instance, or by device type, or we can build views for customers or services as well, you could say, where we just add elements in there and allow you to easily navigate and find your way around and locate the elements that are of interest. But you also have that alarm bubble up to the top, so you can see where the problems are located in your system. So be aware that views is important not only to find your way, but also for filtering and security. If I want to define what a person can or cannot see, or where he can do settings on some of those elements, then I need to specify the correct views so that I can easily use them during my security configuration. So let's take a look at that and how to build that tree structure and create new views and add some content in those views. As before, we're going to be using our right-click menu. So we right-click somewhere in our tree structure where we want to add that new view. So in this case, we're right-clicking on USA and we go for New, and underneath New, now we're going to add a new view. What will happen? It will immediately add a new item in there that will have something like the default name New View 1 or something like that. And it's an edit box, and I can just start typing and giving it the name that I want to give it. So here I just created a new view, New York. It is still empty, so we'll take a look at how to add content to that view. Before we do so, if you want to change any of the existing views and rename them, so just right click, rename, and also the edit box will pop up again in line, or you can also delete an element or a view, I rather say. And if you delete a view, it means that all the elements that are in there are not deleted. So here we're only talking about deleting the view, the grouping, you could say. We're not deleting the actual objects that are in there. We're only deleting the group object, which is the view. If you delete a view, everything which is underneath there will go to the root, except if they are already in some other views, then they will still remain in there. But if they would not be in any view anymore, they would eventually be added or popping up in the root view, which is Global Telecom Corp in this tree structure here. Okay, so we right click, go for new view and we specify the name, and then we have an empty view. How do we add content in there? Well, that's with the drag and drop editing. But before we can do drag and drop editing, you have to be aware that we already saw drag and drop during, for instance, the alarm console. And in the alarm console, we were able to take an element, drag and drop it into the alarm console, or a view. You drag and drop a view into the alarm console. So it's something that I use on a regular basis, you could say, the drag and drop. So I rather not have it changing by mistake if I suddenly drop it somewhere on an incorrect place. So therefore, because editing is a rather drastic change, you could say, we only do the drag and drop editing if you really go into a drag and drop editing mode. So you really need to right click anywhere in your surveyor, use that last option then in there, drag and drop editing, and then you will see that your tree structure is changing a little bit in background, and it has a new section there at the top, drag and drop, to organize your surveyor with an exit editing possibility. And now you can drag and drop and move your objects around in your tree structure. So here on the right hand side, we can see that we are taking our transmission manager and we're dragging it from Atlanta. So it is currently in Atlanta. So we drag and drop it onto New York. And you can see that in the tooltip, we move that object and it says move to New York. So that's the default drag and drop. I mentioned previously also that an element can actually be in more than one view. So let's imagine that you want to add this transmission manager in both Atlanta and New York. Well, then you need to drag and drop it to New York. But instead of just doing a regular drag and drop, you need to press and hold your control key. And then you will see that the move changes to copy. And then you will be able to add your transmission manager in both those views. Be aware, it's a copy. It's not a duplicate of the element. So the element still only exists once on your system, but it's just referenced in two different views to that specific element there. So it's a copy, it's the pointer or the reference to your element that is going from both views to the same element. So it's a copying of that reference you're doing. You're not duplicating the element itself. Keep that in mind. Now let's play around with that a little bit already in our training system here. So within our training demo system, I will be playing around a little bit in this specific view here that we have available for us to play with. And this view services and SLAs has already a couple of objects in there, some services, SLA, and some elements, some Brussels elements and some London elements. So logically, I want to organize things a little bit and make a view Brussels and London. So therefore, I just on the view where I want to create them in, I right click on that view and I go for new view, and then I type the name that I want, Brussels, for instance. Be aware it will check, and apparently I already have Brussels somewhere, so I just add a small one behind there. So I create Brussels. Let me do that again and also create London. So I right click once more on the view there, and I go for new view, and it will pop up again with a new item, new view. One again with immediately editing possibility, London 1 as well. Okay, so I created a new view Brussels and a new view London. They are still empty, so how do I add content now? Well, by default, if I take my Brussels, my first Brussels element, and I move it there, I can see the cursor as well. That's not working. So I can just drag and drop it on the card pane here. So if I drop it here, it opens up the element card. So that's what the drag and drop does to the card pane. I can also drag and drop it to the surveyor, and then it adds the possibility to add an alarm console for your Brussels elements. But I cannot drag and drop it somewhere in the surveyor itself. That's not allowed. by default. So if I really want to do that, I need to go into that very specific drag and drop editing mode. So let's make it a little bit bigger. So I right click anywhere in the surveyor and I go for that last item, drag and drop editing. If I click on it, you will see the background. It changes a little bit lighter, and you have that section at the top that appears there where I can exit again. So I can exit again, then I'm back, do it again. I go into drag and drop editing. So now that I'm in that mode, be aware if you click on something, normally it opens up the card. So it doesn't do that anymore because I want to be able to easily select something or open something up and go navigating around without being bothered with the cards for the moment. What I want to do is I want to move the Brussels, the first element to Brussels here. Okay, let's take it, let's drag it and drop it there. You can see the tooltip says move to Brussels. All right, perfect. Let's take the second one, do it again. You move to Brussels, drag and drop to Brussels. Perfect. That worked very well. Now that's all fine. I'm able to do that, but let's for London do that as well, but I already have 3 elements there. So while there's actually a second possibility to drag and drop there, because if I want to do all 3 of them, I cannot not do a multiple selection. That's not possible. If I press and hold Shift or Control, doesn't really matter. I cannot do multiple selection in a tree. That's not supported. So if I want to select all 3 London elements, well, then I can actually open up the view on top of that, or the root view you could also do. Yeah, I cannot click and open it. Well, indeed, you can also right click actually. So if I right click on that view and I say open or open a new card, doesn't really matter. And I go to that view, and then I don't really worry about the visuals. I want to go below that view and have that list. And here I have the possibility to do a multiple selection and drag and drop them from there. Note if I would be going to the root, remember there is a filter on the right hand side as well. So if I want to search for London, then I can also search for London, and then with pressing and holding Control or Shift, you can do a multiple selection of all the 3 items here, all the 3 London devices. I can drag them and I can move them and I can drop them there on London. And the tooltip also says 1, 2, 3, move to London. And if I drop it there, bam, they are all 3 in one go added to London. Okay, so I also have that TV switch. Let me just close this card for a moment now. This TV switch, if I want to move it to Brussels, that's all fine, but it's actually one that also is applicable or used in London. So I want to move it to London as well. So if I move it to London, okay, but now it's no longer in Brussels. So how can I do it in both? Well, therefore you need to move it, drag and drop to Brussels, but you can see in the tooltip by default it's a move, but if I press and hold Control, it will do a copy. And now you can see if I drop it in there, you will see TV switch is over there available in Brussels and still in London. There's a second way of doing that. If you right click and edit the TV switch, or if you open the card and you go to the hamburger menu edit, you will see that on the second page, you can also see that tree structure, and you can see it's both in Brussels and in London. So here you can do a multiple selection. I could also, for instance, add it in let's see, in operations in Asia or in Americas, or so you can do a multiple. You can put it in multiple views. As long as they are side by side and not underneath each other, parent-child is not possible. I can no longer add it into the view here. Well, I can add it in here, but as soon as I add it in Brussels, it will no longer be directly in there, but indirectly in the top views above it. So also during the editing of an element, you can combine it and add it into more than one element. Okay, so I was organizing things a little bit. Note there are some services here. So also services, I can drag and drop them into London, for instance. Nickelodeon, I'll add this one to Brussels, and the SLA, I'll add this one into Brussels, so that now also the services are added nicely into their views. Okay, so I created a new view. I, with drag and drop, added some elements in there. Also from a card, I dragged and drop and added some elements in there. Remember, use the control if you want to put it into more than one view. Okay, I already showed you how to drag and drop it from a view card so that you can have multiple elements selected at once. There is a special case for drag and dropping of a complete view structure. So let's play around with that as well. So here in the example, I have New York, the state, and I have New York City, the city. And I can basically take the city and move it to New York. So also a complete view structure can be moved to another parent. Okay, that's by default. If I press and hold the control, and that's where the special case comes into play, because before we were adding two references to the same element, but a view cannot exist twice, so it will create a new view here. So if I no longer move New York City to the state, but I press and hold Control so that it creates a copy, well, then I will end up with a New York City copy underneath the New York State and still have the original view as well. So if we play around with that, I have, for instance, my Brussels view. I do see that I have another view there, trend templates, which is empty. There's no subview yet. So if I want to move Brussels, I can just reorganize it over there, or I can just move it back to where it was. So that's a complete view structure. You can completely move from one place to another place, and that's with everything underneath it. Even if it has subviews, the whole section is being moved. You can move the whole training view, for instance, to somewhere else. That's possible. Now, if I do that by going, for instance, Brussels, moving it again to that empty place there, the tooltip says move, but if I press and hold Control, it will make a copy. What happens? It will make a Brussels 1 copy, and I have those elements in there as well. The same elements are still in that original place where the original view is still existing. So it's to create a little bit of a copy where maybe you want to play around with that, or you make a similar site once more, and then you can, of course, right click on that name and say rename, and that's for instance Paris I'm creating, and this already exists as well, so Paris 1, for instance. Of course I would still need to change the content as well. Now, deleting a view, if I want to clean up that Paris again, I can just right click and delete. I renamed it to Paris, and now I will delete it. What happens if you delete those views? Well, everything which is underneath it won't be deleted, but it will, if it doesn't, if it would not be in any other view, it would immediately go to the root. But here I can see that it actually still exists in other views. Let me just quickly, just for sake of example, edit this TV switch and no longer add it in Brussels and London and only in Paris. Okay, apply. Well, then you would see that if I now delete the Paris view, all the elements, are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. All the elements are moved to the top if they are no longer in another view, but the Brussels ones are still in there, so they still have a placeholder somewhere in the tree, except for that TV switch. So that TV switch went to the roots. And be careful with the roots, because if people don't have access to the root view and they only have access to certain subviews, they will never see that element if it ends up in that root. So be careful with security because you might lose visibility on elements as well. Let's move it back to Brussels, and with a control drag to London as well. So the TV switch is again back in that both views. Now, if I would like to remove the TV switch from Brussels again, well, I could try to move it to London as well, but yeah, it says like it's already in London. I don't want to move it elsewhere. I just want to remove it from Brussels. How do I remove it from Brussels? I cannot drag and drop it elsewhere. Well, the editing was possible, of course, by right-clicking and go to Edit, go to the views and remove it from Brussels here. But there is an alternative way. Let me close this card. I can also right-click on the TV switch and say remove from parent. Then it will be removed from Brussels and it will still remain, remove from Brussels, yes. It will still remain in the other locations. So the TV switch still remains in the other 3 places in the tree structure. So that's why we also have this remove from parent, so that you can easily just remove it from that specific parent and anywhere else it is still active or present, I should say. Okay, so that's the views. I created 2 views. I added some content in there. I did it with dragging it from the card view as well. And I was playing around a little bit with that control dragging and remove from parent. Once you're finished, don't forget to exit the editing so that you're going back to the normal view, and then you can select again on a certain item to immediately see the associated cards and immediately open up the elements. Now we're back into regular mode. Okay, so that was what I wanted to talk about with views. Now let's take it one level higher, and that's creating a service, because the service will also impact the alarms and it will show you the actual impact on your system. Because just a quick recap on services, services are immediately giving you that service perspective on your view. You can see in here I have a couple of channels. If I open up the channels, I can see which elements are responsible for that specific service that I'm delivering to my customers. And whenever alarms are happening, I can also see the impact on the services that are being delivered throughout my system here. So I immediately have that service perspective that is being added with services. Remember, one service alarm or one alarm on an element could impact only one service, but another kind of like similar alarm, you could say, could immediately impact a whole bunch of other more important services, maybe, or more in quantity. So therefore, with that service perspective, you can see the actual impact on what you're delivering with your system. And instead of just seeing the element alarms, you can really see the service alarms and the impact on your services. This is an example of 2 seemingly the same kind of situation or alarms happening on 2 devices or elements here, and we can immediately see that the first one actually only has 1 impact on a service and the name is there, and the other one is actually 5 services that are being impacted, and a whole series of services, service names are enumerated in that alarm as well. So you can see the actual impact there immediately. Okay, we've covered that before. Let's create a service. So how do we do that? Once more, we're going to go to the right-click menu somewhere in your surveyor tree structure, or in this case, from the card menu, that's the same, where we can just immediately say new instead of a view and an element. We'll now take a look at the 3rd item, a service. When we create a new service, it will immediately give me the service wizard, or the editing wizard, you could say, where I can start specifying the details. On the first edit page, general, the only important thing there is the name. Give it a unique, good, solid name. Think about naming conventions. Optionally, you can add a description to that. Specify the DMA where it needs to be located. Replication is the same as element replication. I'll come back to that later on. So only the name is important. In the advanced, you do have the possibility to specify whether or not timeouts need to be included and visualized in this service, or if you say, I don't care about the timeouts to be visualized in that service. And you also have, and that's an important one, a service protocol. Well, it's an important one because that makes or defines the definition or the difference between a basic service and an enhanced service. We will start first with a basic and easy service. So we'll create just a new name and start adding content. And then we will later on come back to edit our existing basic service and pimp it to an enhanced service by attaching a service protocol to it. So if you attach a service protocol to your service, then you basically pimp it up to an enhanced service, and there are also basically parameters and alarms possible on that service level. I'll show you the difference on how that works and what the actual difference is. But we start with a basic one, and we just give it a name, and then we go click on next, which basically brings us to the next tab page at the header there. That is the parameters. It says parameters, but basically you're in most cases just adding a bunch of elements in there. So your service delivering to your customer or through your network, you need to add all the elements that are responsible for that specific service. So typically you add elements, but why does it say parameters? Because actually an element is a group of parameters, but you could also add a subservice, another service there as well. And an element could also be broken up, and also only a part of an element, only a couple of parameters can be added in there. So that's why the name is referring to parameters. Now, how do we add parameters or groups of parameters in there? Well, we can add that with the bottom buttons there. Before I add an element, I can also add some groups to keep it a little bit more logical, and I'll use that during my demo as well. So I will be creating two groups, Brussels and London, for instance, and then when I added those groups in there, add elements, and then I can just add some elements. Note, these are all the elements from my system, but they are filtered here, so I can easily find the elements that I'm interested in, select some of them, and then add them into that section. Once I populated it a little bit, so I created a group Brussels with a couple of Brussels IRDs and a London group with a couple of London devices or elements in there. Okay, so far so good. I'll immediately do that as an example. But once I create one of those items, you will see on the right-hand side the details. Two things I want to mention before we jump into the demo is the two top sections. The alias, that just allows you to define an alternative name for the element, typically within the context of this service. So the element itself has London IRD1, but within the context here, I maybe want to say that, for instance, this is the London main, and the other one is the London backup. From an element perspective, it's just 1, 2, 3, a number 36, 37, maybe I have a whole series of them, but within the context of the service, you might want to give it a little bit a more meaningful name. That's optional, you don't need to do that. By default, also, the element will be added as a whole, all the parameters. So that's the default. I just add an element, the complete element is in there. But sometimes an element can be shared for different services, and you might only be interested in a part of that element. Therefore, you can deselect the all parameters, and then you will have a list of all the parameters, and you can make that sub-selection of all the parameters that are meaningful and interesting and impactful for this service that I'm creating here. Okay, that will already be sufficient for a basic service. So let's do that in a demo, and let's dive into our system again. So forget about the groups that I created with the views. Forget about what I've done before. I will now just create a brand new service with some of those Brussels and London IRDs that I have. So within that view 505 here, views, services and SLAs, I will create a new service by right-clicking on there and going to new, not view, not element. We've done that before. Now we go for service, and it opens up a service card to immediately start configuring that. The name, just to be sure, I will start with service, and I will give it my name and give it also the training suffix. So it's a service BERT training. I can give it an optional description. The DataMiner, I only have one DataMiner here, replication. We don't worry about that now. And as I mentioned, yeah, timeout, you can play around with that. We will start with a basic service. So we won't worry about the service protocol for now. We will leave that empty. We'll close that. We'll forget about that for now. We'll come back to that later. We start with a basic service, which is just a combination of a bunch of elements that we're grouping together. So we only created the name or specified the name. Now we click on next, which is basically bringing me to the second tab page where I can start defining what needs to be inside my service. So I'll create two groups to keep things a little bit logical, because there's a side switch between London and Brussels. So I want to be able to switch easily between London and Brussels. So to be able to do that, I'll create a group which has the name Brussels. I use the abbreviated version, Brussels, BRU, and I'll add another group. Be careful, I still had Brussels selected, so it created a subgroup underneath Brussels. So you can also create subgroups, be aware of that. So let me delete this one again and make sure that I select the root again, the parameters, and add a group there. Then it's correctly next to Brussels. I have the London view. Okay. Two groups. Now I can start adding content into Brussels and London. So I select first of all Brussels to add the Brussels elements. So now I click on add elements, and then I have all of my elements in my system. So that's a lot of content. So let me do a little bit of filtering on Brussels, and it's the IRD 1 and 2. I do a multiple selection and click on the add to move them. Small side note, they don't really move to the right hand side. Why is that? Well, that's actually because I can add a element twice. Because I mentioned it's also possible to add a part of an element. So I can add the same element twice and then add 2 times a different part. Why does it need to be different or 2 times added? Because I can add some dynamics on there. We'll see that I can add some dynamic behavior, and then maybe one part or another part needs to be dynamically included or excluded. I'll come back to dynamic behavior, but just remember that you can do that, adding the element twice. I'll just add Brussels IRD 1 and 2 underneath Brussels, and underneath London I'll do the same thing. Add on element, click on add element, search for the London elements. There they are, 1, 2, 3 apparently. Well, let's just add all 3. Okay. I now have my Brussels and my London elements added to that. Yeah, be aware, I was able to create an alias. So let's maybe say that this IRD3, it's only a London backup of backup, something like that. For instance, it's really something in worst case that I want to use that third element. So I want to really indicate that this is something I typically won't use. Okay, so you can give it within the context of this service a little bit of specific name. Instead of all parameters, you could also go for a subset. I'll do that with that backup of backup element here, where I won't add the element as a whole, but I disable the all parameters, and then I say, for instance, only the audio output level, for instance, is being included, just as sake of an example. So those ones, other ones, just have still the default name and still all the parameters in there. Only the last one I tweaked a little bit by giving it a special name and saying that not all the parameters, but only one needs to be in there. That's sufficient for a basic element. Let's play around with creating that one already and see what we have created. So I can see that, let me close Brussels and London here. I have a service, BERT training, and I can see that all of my elements are in there. And if I open up my elements, I will have all the parameters in there to start configuring my Brussels equipment, my London, and here my backup of backup. This one only has one parameter in there, nothing more, nothing less. And if an alarm happens on one of those elements, we will see that if I go to active alarms, my Brussels IRD has a critical high. It has an impact on actually a couple of services. Let me move that a little bit to the front. So you can see, and also the service impact maybe. So you can see that there are 3, it's actually already included in other services, but my service BERT training is impacted here. So it immediately has that impact as well. So I can see my service, I can open it up. That's the most basic form that I created. And I can see already the basic service impact as well. So, okay, so far so good. I just created a grouping of those elements into a service, and I can see the impact on my alarms, and they influence the service, whether this service is critical or not. So if one of the elements goes into an alarm, you will see that the impact of your service, and this service will also track a history of alarms and things like that. So I can see last 24 hours, how has this service been behaving. And the next section, we will also attach an SLA to this one. Okay, so far so good, you can say, but I want to make it a little bit more dynamic. So what I will do now is I will go into that next section where underneath the alias and the parameters, I can add some dynamic behavior. And to be able to add dynamic behavior, I actually have 2 levels, you could say, of dynamic behavior. You can completely include or exclude an element into the service, depending on certain conditions. In our case, we will be looking like to this TV switch, if it's like on site 1 or site 2. That's completely including or excluding. There is also the possibility to say like, yeah, let's keep it included, but I wanted to put it in use or not in use. If it's not in use, I can then define a specific severity capping on there. Well, let's take a look at how that reflects in the UI, because maybe that will make clear what the subtle difference is between excluding and including and the not used. So here we have a couple of examples. If I use inclusion, exclusion, I will see that my devices here are either included in bold or they are excluded if I take a look at the service itself. But if I take a look in the surveyor tree structure, this IRD2 of Brussels, it's excluded. I won't even see it. So it's not shown underneath Nickelodeon here. It's completely out. It has no influence on the alarm state possible. There is no impact. It's completely out. It's like it's not there. Only in the configuration, when you really open it up, you can see that there is something that is currently excluded. Okay. Yeah, that's perfectly valid. But if I say, yeah, but my Brussels IRD, it's like my backup device. And if this one would fail, it's not good because my backup is no longer there to take over if something would go wrong with my main. So I kind of want to see that if something goes wrong with my backup, that it has a little bit of influence on my service, that basically the redundancy or the backup is no longer there. If you just completely exclude it, that's not possible because the backup is no longer in the picture. So if you want to keep the backup a little bit in the picture, well, therefore you can go for that not in use state instead. Typically you use one or the other. So if you go for that not in use, then you will see that it is not marked with excluded in the service itself, but it's not in use, and therefore it is still visible under the service, and the service will show that the IRD2 is there, but it's a little bit dimmed out. So it's still there, but it's dimmed out. So you can see visually that it's not in use. And if it goes into alarm, you have the possibility to let it bubble up with that small arrow next to it. So this critical alarm bubbles up as a blue and actually shows a warning alarm on our Nickelodeon, showing like, oh, our Nickelodeon is still doing a great job because it's still doing green on all the active devices. But be aware, be careful there. There's a not in use device, a device which is currently not in use, which is critical. So therefore, my service is in a warning state, just to draw a little bit of attention, like be careful here, that backup is not ready there to take over anymore. So that's the subtle difference. Either you go for just a complete exclusion inclusion, the simplest form you could say, or you go for that not in use state where you can do that bubble up. That bubble up capping here, that warning, let me go back one slide. That's the capping here that is being defined here. The maximum severity on an element not in use is warning. So if it's critical, it's still gonna bubble up warning because that's the maximum it can bubble up in a not used state. For an element which is included, you typically go up to the full critical, but there is a possibility to go for a major bubble up, and that's an example we have here. That's the last one. This one is everything is included, and everything is in use, so they are all in bold, completely included, not dimmed out, not marked with anything. Everything is all nicely in there. Okay, but it is still possible to define, if I go back to one slide, that maximum severity on included elements was a major here. Let's take a look at that. The maximum alarm here is indeed a major that bubbles up to Nickelodeon. Even though my Brussels IRD here is critical, it only shows a major on that service. Typically, it goes critical also to the service, but it is possible to include an element here. You could say you could also put the major on that element itself. Well, indeed, but maybe the element is also used in another service, and that service is more important, and this one wants to bubble up critical, but this one is less important, less frequently used, less important, therefore it only bubbles up as a major and not as a critical. Subtle difference that is possible here. Okay, we will play around with those items and go for, before we go into that replication, with enhancing our service a little bit. Okay, so before I created my service, my very basic one, and I just added Brussels and London in there without any dynamic. So everything is always included. And I generated an alarm and I saw the impact on my service. Okay, let's go back, and when opening my service on the service card, I click on the card menu and I go to edit, or you can also just right click on the service there and go to edit, and it basically goes back into the editing. Okay, first page is still okay. Yeah, the last page is views. That's where it's in the view structure, which properties, class, gold, silver, bronze, or whatever properties you have, you define on there. That's the same as elements, so we don't really need to talk about that. Okay, we created a service with just some fixed elements in there, but I want that dynamic behavior. To be able to have that dynamic behavior, I will take a look at this TV switch. Let's open it up in a new card because I have this switch here. Let me make it a little bit closer. Where I have a couple of parameters where I can play with. It's the London switch, and I can switch between main and backup in London, also Brussels, and then I have a site selection between Brussels and London. So I have some switches to play with. So I can see the first one is the switch, the site switch between Brussels and London. Let's take a look at that, because I can also define that dynamic behavior on the complete site, Brussels or London. Let's first play around with that. So I select Brussels and I say that I want to completely include or exclude Brussels depending on that site switch. That's the first thing I want to do, the complete inclusion or exclusion. So by default, Brussels is always in this service. I no longer want it always, I want it dynamically. So I want it to be included or excluded. You can choose include. I want it included when the site switch is on Brussels, so I add that condition. I have different conditions, a parameter, an alarm, or an alarm state on an element. I just typically is more like a parameter value, like a switch kind of thing, or a router or a matrix. So I go for that is the parameter value of that TV switch. I can search in there as well, the TV switch, that element here. The parameter switch site selection is the switch site selection equal to Brussels, then it is Brussels is included, and London, same thing. London is no longer always present. It will be based on the same switch there. So it's included if the parameter of my TV switch element, the parameter switch site selection, which we see on the right hand side, is equal to London, then London is included. Okay, so I defined that on Brussels and London, the complete site. Let's take a look at that and apply that, and let's see what it does. And I can immediately see that indeed my service in the tree structure only shows Brussels. If I open it up, Brussels is bold and not dimmed out, and the other ones, London, is dimmed out and excluded. If I move the switch to London, you can see now London is included and London is shown in that service. So that's a complete inclusion of Brussels or London depending on that switch. So each time I click, the whole service switches over to London. And that's of course interesting. If I now say, for instance, I'm running on Brussels and I open up and I generate an alarm on Brussels, and my service goes into alarm. So I have an impact on my service. My Brussels is impacting the BERT training service, so it's red. Now I can say, oh, something is happening there. I need to do a site switch over. I take action. I switch over to London. Brussels will remain in alarm, but I move to London. So my service is back okay. And this Brussels is no longer impacting those services anymore because it switched. It's out of the picture. It's completely gone. Brussels has no impact anymore or any of the alarms. I don't care about the alarm anymore. And my service is doing a great job via London. Okay, let's go back to a normal situation and let's now add a little bit of dynamic between in Brussels itself. So let me remove the alarm from Brussels. Let's go back to Brussels and let's now go back to the editing of my service. Go back to parameters. So I added dynamic behavior on the whole site Brussels and the whole site London. Now I will add dynamic behavior between the main and the backup, you could say, inside Brussels. I'll do that with the switch in Brussels between main and backup. And I won't do the complete inclusion exclusion, but now I will use that in use, not in use, which is the second part. So it's no longer, it's indicated here, the in use, not in use, as influence the overall alarm state of your service, but that's basically the not used, in use, not in use. So Brussels IRD1 is considered the main. Let's agree that this one is the main. So it's no longer always influencing the overall alarm state or in use. It is based on certain conditions. And that condition is again a parameter value of the TV switch, still the same element, but now another parameter there, and that is the switch inside Brussels. The switch inside Brussels, if it's on main, then it is in use. And the second one is based on conditions. That's the backup one, is same thing. The element TV switch if the switch inside Brussels is equal to the backup, then it will influence the overall alarm state. So this one is when it's on main, and the second one if it's on backup. Let's apply and take a look at that. So now I can see that Brussels 1 is bold and selected there, and the other one is dimmed out, not in use, and also in the tree structure, Brussels backup is still in the picture. So we do still visualize this one there as a little bit present into the system as not in use, you could say. So if I would generate an alarm on the first one, it will of course still impact my service as a full alarm critical problem on my service. Also the alarm in the alarm console is really indicated that this service is impacted. Let's put it back. But now let's see what happens if my, let's maybe switch Brussels, just as sake of example there. Now it's IRD2 doing the job and the other one is not in use. And also here they switched, 1 and 2 are switched. If I switch back to the main, it will once again go 1 and 2 and the other way around. So it nicely switches the not in use as well, of course, on there. Now what happens if I force an alarm onto my backup device? Did I do any capping? I didn't really look at it, but I can see that there is actually nothing bubbling up to my service. So by default, I do see that it is still impacting my service in the alarm console, so it still is included in that service, but my service itself is still indicated as green because the bubble up, the capping, let me check that in the editing, was defined as normal. So on the second tab page, if I go for the Brussels IRD1 and IRD2, you can see that the maximum severity when it's not used is normal. So it's completely suppressed. If I allow there a warning to bubble up, I would need to do it then in both cases, the main or the backup. A warning is able to bubble up. If I do that, I will see that it now bubbles up as a warning alarm. A blue arrow goes up and you can see that the service is now indicated in a blue state. So also here, the blue is bubbling up to the top. So this way you can see that there is a bubble up happening and that capping is important there to be able to configure that bubble up. Just as for complete sake there, we can also cap the normal if we go for a major, for instance, and then we generate an alarm on Brussels, which is critical. I basically said, like, if it's included, don't bubble up to critical, but bubble up to major. So now the critical bubbles up as a major for an included element. So that's the difference between those bubble ups, you could say. Okay, so I believe that gave me all the possibilities here. I could do the same thing to be complete on the London, but it's exactly the same thing to do with the switch on London. I'm not going to go through that example yet. Or not. Okay, so I did it for Brussels. You can do the same thing for London. Let me go back on the apply and just go back to a regular normal mode for now. So I have my Brussels site, which is active, and currently the main is doing the job and everything is back normal. So I made a basic service and then I added some dynamic behavior there, but with a complete inclusion, exclusion of a site. And then within a site, I defined an in use, not in use for a main and backup device that I have already configured in Brussels. You can do the same thing in London. That's a basic service. Now, what's the difference with an enhanced service? Well, the difference is subtle, you could say, because it will do exactly the same thing with an enhanced service, but you will have next to the devices view, you will have another tab page here that allows you to have service parameters and actual service alarms, because up to now, all the alarms that we saw were still alarms happening on the actual elements, the Brussels IRD, which has an impact on a service. So we didn't really have any service alarms. So if you really want to have actual service alarms, we need to make it an enhanced service. Let's take a look at that. So we go once more to the edit of our service, and now we will go to that advanced section on the first page, and we will pimp it to a service or an enhanced service. To be able to pimp it to an enhanced service, we need to define a service protocol. So it's a connector behind the scenes that is able to add some additional logic and make it a smart or enhanced service. We do have some service standard protocols available off the shelf, and we do have a basic one and a site redundancy one. The Skyline, I will use the Skyline service definition basic. So the service definition or service protocol is using that connector or protocol logic to make that service definition available here. So we use, as our example here, the service definition basic. This one also has a possibility to define alarming and trending on there. I'll immediately assign the standard template that I have available in my system, the standard alarm and trend template on there. Okay, so I just selected that service definition basic and the alarm and trend template, and now let's apply and see what happens. I note I mentioned that there would be a different tab page there that pops up, and indeed immediately I have this second tab page there. That's the subtle difference that happened. So I have this additional page in there, and this additional page, it's a basic service definition. So the only thing that it has is just some general service severity. The general parameters is just the general parameters that typically an object has in DataMiner. But that admin section is interesting, because that admin table allows me to do some neat stuff here and generate alarms on a service itself, on a service level itself. Now, I do have all of the elements in here automatically with their alias and their real name and their current alarm severity and their state if they are included or excluded, and then a combination of both states. That's the most basic table that we can have. That's the basic service definition, but we can make any kind of more complicated logic customized in there as well to make any logical decisions if Brussels is online or London is online, which one is main backup, and do alarming on these things. But actually here we can already do some alarming on there, because if I take a quick look at the alarm template, let's open up the alarm template. From the service, I right click to go to protocols and view the alarm template standards. And let's maximize that for a moment to take a look at that alarm template that I selected. I'm mainly interested in that calculated one, and I will see that I basically have all the different possibilities. And what I defined is that I said I want to generate an alarm whenever one of my included elements, if it's included, I don't care about excluded for now. If it's included and if it is in any of the warning, minor, major, critical states, I want to generate an alarm on the service itself. So let's play around with that, and let's and it's a critical. That's an important one to mention as well. Let's take a look at that. If I go to my devices, and if I go to my audio output level, and if I just generate not a critical alarm, but a minor alarm, the light blue here, what will happen is that there is a minor alarm on the device layer, but my service will go into a critical state. So I can see in the surveyor or in the tree or in the surveyor there or in the header bar that my service is into critical state, even though my devices or elements are all not critical and they are just having some other alarms there. So I can see that the Brussels device IRD here is into a major alarm. It has impact on the service, BERT service, but also the BERT service, BERT training here, is popping up in my alarm console. So there is an actual service alarm happening now, even though I don't have any critical problems on my devices in Brussels and London. It does indicate that there is a critical problem for my service delivery. So here I can make that distinction between device or element alarms and service alarms in those with enhanced services. So the impact on services can be different than the impact on elements. And you can really create those service alarms in here. So it is possible that maybe only a warning alarm happens, you immediately pop it up as a warning or a critical, or the other way around. If a warning alarm or a critical alarm happens on a backup, I can also generate a service alarm here. So that's the subtle difference between a basic service and an enhanced service, but it has a fundamental impact because I do have those summary parameters on there, and those can be effectively creating different alarms on my service layer compared to my element layer. Okay. So that was the final thing I wanted to add on the services, except for that replication. That's the same thing as replicating an element. I believe I explained that already. It's the same principle. If you enable the replication of a service, you can connect to another DataMiner system by specifying the URL or IP address and specifying a username and password. You can retrieve the services and select an existing service that already exists somewhere else to replicate it onto your system here, kind of mimicking it. Sometimes that's being used, for instance, if you have regional DataMiner systems and you have one top level system, you can replicate existing services onto that top level system. Okay, so that was creating a service with a little bit of dynamics, and we also at the end pimped it up to an enhanced service. Now that service, I want to track over time how I have been doing. My service level agreements, I can add them to my system, and I can add that history perspective onto a DataMiner or onto a service. I can do that by creating a new service or a new SLA, I want to say, a service level agreement. I'll immediately do that in a demo as well. So what will happen is we will track the availability of a specific service that I can select. And over time, I will see at the end of the month, did I have an uptime of 99.99% or what was the actual uptime or service level agreement I reached at the end of the month. So that allows you to really, during the month, to keep track of how much uptime you had, to have early warnings on any of the outages you had. If you have too many, it will do also a kind of prediction towards the end of the month. And at the end of the month, I have a nice report that I can create, and I can have a nice overview on how my system behaved, what my availability was for all the different services, create some nice reports, and have some proof there on how I did. Okay, so that's what the objective is by creating such an SLA. So let's dive in and create a new SLA. So again, in a certain section of your DataMiner system, or typically from the surveyor, I do it. I right click somewhere on the surveyor and I go for a new SLA. And this is from the service menu actually, that you can immediately have an SLA attached to that service. You give it a name, and now it's important next to the name, and this is the most important thing, you need to attach it to a specific service that you created before. So here I create for Nickelodeon an SLA, so I obviously choose the service Nickelodeon. So it's always attached to one service, but one service can have multiple SLAs, because we will see that SLAs are taking a look at the alarms that are happening. So you can track, for instance, the availability of Nickelodeon as a whole, or also, for instance, or let's say another example, if it's about a satellite service, if the satellite service is available or not available, or another SLA which is tracking if it's degraded, and if the delay time or the round trip time is too long, then it's degraded, so that the degrading is also being tracked. So it is possible technically to have two SLAs attached to one service. We'll keep it simple and just create one SLA for our service we just created before. An optional description, optionally the DataMiner agent you want to host it on, we only have one. Again, you can replicate it. By now we know, I just mentioned what replication is. And we do need to select a definition file for our SLA, a little bit like our service has a definition. Our SLA also have a definition, and we do have a basic one available off the shelf, which we can leverage here in our training. You can therefore also customize this, so it uses the connector technology behind the scenes, so you do have the capabilities of defining and tweaking all the SLA logic that you want inside those connectors as well. So we do have all the goodies there to be able to tweak that. But in most cases, the SLA basic definition is actually a solid one. Combined again with alarm and trend templates, we can create our SLA. Okay, once we created our SLA, and that's what I will immediately do then, we can start configuring it. So before going into the configuration, let's immediately create it already. It's just an empty one. It's not going to do a lot, but just for the example, let's already do it. I already have the SLA, the service, of course, created before, like I just did. Let me just, for sake of our examples, immediately put it in a green solid good state again, so that I can start from a nice good normal system. So I have a good operating service there. Let's attach an SLA to that, so we can right click on any place in the surveyor to position where we want our SLA to be positioned. We right click on there, we go for new SLA. So we already had view, element, service. Now we're going to go for SLA. Okay, so the SLA, as always, we give it a name. So just to keep it a little bit consistent, we're gonna have the same name as our service, but attach SLA at the end. And of course, we need to select our service, so I can filter on that list by specifying my first name Bert, and I will immediately see my service Bert training there. Okay. So I specify a name and attach it to my service, an optional description, and a data miner. Now the service definition, the SLA definition file that I can choose, on our system we only have one, which is actually a solid one, the SLA definition basic, but remember, this can be tweaked and modified. There are, let me just put in standard alarm and trend templates on there just to have something, but we've covered alarm and trend templates already. Okay, so that's all I need to do, because the only we don't really need to worry about those things. The second page is where you want to locate it, and the properties is what we can assign, like a class gold, silver, bronze kind of property. So SLA is actually quite simple. You just specify a name, attach it to your service, and go for that basic definition. We only have one. Okay, that's created and let's see what happens. So the same icon pops up as a service, but it has a little contract in front of it as well. The lines that are added there, that's the contract that is being tracked, the availability of my service that is being tracked there. Okay, so I have my SLA, it immediately opens up and it says it's compliant, 100% availability, but hold your horses, we didn't configure it yet. So the first thing I will need to do, I will need to go to a couple of configuration pages here to configure it. And that's what we will first take a look at because what is this thing going to track? That's what we will configure now. So we have two important pages to start with, and that is the SLA configuration. So the general configuration, and that is the window size and the alarm level. That are the most important two settings here. Typically, the window setting will be 1 month. That's the most typical for an SLA. You could say you specify a fixed window of 1 month. You could also have a sliding window where it keeps tracks of the last 30 days, for instance. Or the last week in this case. We will take a shorter window for our example, but you choose if it's a sliding window moving along with you in time, or if it's a fixed window, then it's from the first of the month to the last of the month, and the next first of the next month, it will reset everything, and it will start all over again with new figures and full 100% again. So that's the full reset that happens with a fixed window. A sliding window just moves along with us and old outages are moving out. So that's important. What window are we looking at? And the violation level, you will define what is actually impacting my service. So I have here my Nickelodeon service. When is it down? When is there an impact on the delivery of my service? If it's a warning, yeah, probably I don't need to worry too much about it yet because I will still probably have a good service, but it's just something that I might need to look at. If it's critical, then it's probably down. But anything in between there might depend on your alarm settings, so it might depend on your configuration. In this case, it's at major. I'll probably go for an critical. What is delay time and minimum outage threshold? A little bit special items there. The delay time, it just specifies that if that you do allow a certain delay before you actually take it as an outage. Because if it goes into critical, it might take a few seconds before the redundancy kicks in and moves to a backup device. You allow that kind of redundancy switching, so you allow a couple of seconds before you consider it as an outage. So therefore, the delay time can be specified, and you can say like, oh, let's give it 5 seconds. If it's only going to be critical for a couple of seconds and then it switches over, that's no problem. But if it's more than 5 seconds, then I will start with an outage. The minimum outage threshold is a little bit the same thing, but if you define those 5 seconds, after 5 seconds, do you want to start at 0 and you start your outage, then you go for delay time. If you, after 5 seconds, you say we start with the outage, but we already start with the full 5 seconds, then you go for the minimum outage threshold. Subtle difference. By default, while I'm configuring all of the things, the admin state will be not tracking. So if I'm finished with everything, I will need to, as a final state, put it into tracking and enable my SLA to start the tracking. This tracking, no tracking possibility is also convenient for a maintenance window, for instance. If during the night between 2 and 3 o'clock you do have agreed with your customer that there is a maintenance window and there will be some alarms that will be generated, but you don't want to take them into account for your SLA tracking here, well, put maybe a scheduled task in there that at 2 o'clock you will put this on no tracking, and then at 3 o'clock you will put it back on tracking, and whatever happens in between there won't be taken into account for your availability figures. There's some other options like last manual reset and the reset possibility there. The base timestamp, typically it's the first from the month till the last of the month. If it would be the 15th, for instance, you can have a base timestamp. The outages, how long they are being kept in your outage list. We'll take a look at outages when we are playing around a little bit. SLA validity, when your SLA needs to start and needs to stop, if it's only the first of the next month and it needs to stop at the end of the next month, then you can put some validity in there. So that's a little bit the general settings on my SLA. It's a 1 month period I'm looking at. Whenever criticals are happening, it is going to track and impact my SLA. And then the second part, which is very important, is the compliance. When am I still compliant with what I promised to my customer? How much downtime can I allow in this SLA that I configure here or in this service? So I need to define those allowed violations. So I can define the violations either in absolute or in relative figures. So if it's in relative, it's in percentage. So I can say that I can have 0.1% downtime, for instance, or I can also say in absolute figures how many minutes or seconds that I allow in downtime. You can define it in a total violation. Within a 1 month, I allow, for instance, 90 minutes downtime in this example. But you can also say next to that, maybe those are like 5 or 10 or 20 or 100 short ones. You can also say that one single violation cannot be longer than, in this case, for instance, 5 minutes. And the total of all the violations combined together can no longer than 90 minutes. So the total violations must always be specified if you want to track the availability or the breaching. The single violation is optional, and also a violation count can be limited. So I cannot have 1,000 short violations or outages. That would be too much of jitter, you could say. So the count can be capped, one single violation can be capped, and the total violations together into 1 month can be capped as well before I would breach my SLA. There is also a violation configuration page that I will configure. And once we configure that, we will take a look at it. So let's first go into that configuration. So I previously just added my blank brand new SLA. So let's take a look at those different settings. So the first thing I will do is I will toggle here to go from a fixed or a sliding window option. I will go for a fixed window. So I once more click to have it on fixed. I will go for as sake of an example, instead of 1 month, I'm going to go for 5 minutes. So if I define 5, it will immediately ask me, that's the dependency parameter. Oh, what are the units? Are you talking about 5 days, week, months? Oh, I'm talking about minutes. So let's go for minutes and okay, my 5. So I go for 5 minutes just so that I can do a demonstration. If I would have 1 month, it would be difficult to show figures that are moving because that would take too much time. In my system, I consider a critical that my service is down. So that's the threshold. Critical is down. Everything else is not down. It's currently not tracking yet. So I will actually already put it on tracking or no tracking. I just cannot forget about it then. Maybe I can already put it on tracking so that I don't forget. So tracking, no tracking, remember that you can also do that, for instance, for a maintenance window. The other things, I don't really need to worry too much about that. Okay, so it's already tracking, but what is it tracking? Everything is still green, so it doesn't really matter any yet. We're not generating any outages as an example yet. But when will I still have 100% availability, and when will I breach my expectations? Well, I can define that in the next page. So the first one was the SLA configuration. The next one is the compliance configuration. When am I compliant? Well, in here I can go for an not used or absolute or relative. So I will go for the easiest to understand instead of percentages. If you use percentages, you need to use this percentage here at the bottom, but I will go for the absolute. And if you go for absolute, you need to specify a value, let's say like 30, and then I will say seconds. I will both specify them. If I click on go, I can apply both of them. So I went for 30 seconds, the absolute one. If you would go for relative, you would need to, just to quickly show you, you would need to define a percentage there and define that percentage, but just for sake of example, I will go for absolute because that's easier to understand. I have a 5-minute window and I have 30 seconds of total outage that I allow. One single outage, for instance, I can go absolute there and say for 10, and it also needs units, seconds, apply seconds, and then I can OK that, so you can see again that dependency there. 10 seconds. So the total outage no longer than 30 seconds within a 5-minute window, and one single outage can cannot be longer than 10 seconds. I don't really care about the count. That's not really useful for me now in this demo. Okay, so I defined some general settings of my SLA, the 5-minute window, and critical is not good. I defined the compliance, what is expected to be delivered as a service and what is not good. And there is also some special thing there, the violation settings. Just as a quick example, you can add entries in here, and then you can define that you want to, for instance, filter on certain things like the element name or the class, gold, silver, bronze, or other properties you define on there. Or remember from the information template, the category and key point and component info. So I can say if the component info, if it's audio or video, so you can define if the component info is audio or video, then it's 100% impact, it's completely down. But if my component, it would only be the teletext which is impacted, then it's only 50% or 25% which is being impacted, for instance, on my... So here you can do some more granular settings on things like what kind of impact it is. It's also possible to go for severity, for instance. So if critical is 100%, major is 50%. So you can also play with these kind of things. But I won't make it that complicated here, so I'll just ignore it. It's just going to be always 100% included. Okay, so now I created my SLA and I configured it correctly. Remember, if you would not have enabled tracking yet, make sure you enable the tracking. So now it is tracking, and I can see on my main view, let's take a look at how we are doing. We are still 100% availability there, 100%, and compliant, of course. We didn't have any outages yet. I still have my 30 seconds left and my 10 seconds. So everything seems all okay. You can also see that I'm tracking this service here. It's currently normal, etc. So now let's generate some alarm, and let's open up one of my devices there, and let's make it a little bit smaller. So my audio output level, I can force my service into a critical state there. So let's force it into a state, and I'll immediately go back to a normal state. So you can see it's immediately impacting. So it's my time that I have left is no longer 30 seconds, but it's now 26 seconds, because I already used 4 seconds of outage. My availability went down drastically. On a 5-minute window, it goes very fast, of course. Typically on a 1 month, it would be a lot less. Or you could have an SLA for 1 month and for a year. So both of the two SLAs being tracking the availability there, the availability within a month and within a year. So you can still see that I'm doing a good job. And there's also a predicted availability. So if I'm continuing to do like that, it's actually not going to be so great. But as long as I'm now doing a good job, it is starting to improve. So that number is continuously updating and changing the prediction as I'm doing a good job now. Okay, let's generate yet another outage there. Let's generate again a problem and let's put it back. So note that the nice thing about adding an SLA is that you can really have a nice view here now on this service because, or this SLA attached to the service, because my service is currently showing that I'm doing a great job. It's all green, it's all good. But my SLA actually shows a different story. Because if I open up that one, I can see that my availability is already a little bit in an alarm color there, even a major one, because my figures are actually getting rather bad. So I already have a degraded situation. I'm still compliant. Oh, it's warning, but it's a little bit degraded, but it's still compliant. I'm still going to reach the end of the month with good figures. But it basically adds that history perspective to your view here. And if I would even do it like let it go into alarm for a longer period of time, like 10 seconds, because the 10 seconds is only allowed for the single violation. So you can see that the single violation time left drastically goes to 0 until it breaches, and then you will see that I will have a critical. I didn't meet my expectations, it's breached the compliance, my availability is very low, and I can see that my service, my SLA is into a critical state. So even though if I fix my service, it's back all okay. It might seem all okay from a service perspective, but from an SLA perspective, I see that history perspective and I see that I did a bad job until I reach the end of the month, and then all of the figures, and this just happened, the 5-minute mark just was reached. So if I am at the beginning of a month again, I start with a blank slate again. I have again 100% availability. All my time is still available, and I can start all over again with a new month and try to do a better job this month. So that SLA is nicely tracking for you the availability, gives you early warnings on when you have to be careful with certain services. If your time is running out, it will already start giving you alarms on your SLA. And it gives you that history perspective, basically, if you have been doing a good job this month, yes or no. And if you would ever not breach your SLA, then it would also be clearly tracked and indicated here. Now, one more example that I want to do is, let me see if I can generate another alarm, because there's one more thing that I want to show within this 5-minute window slot. Let's say that, for instance, I have an outage which is taking a little bit longer than 10 seconds, and then I go back for an regular normal alarm. So it already breached, because a single violation should not take longer than 10 seconds. But maybe there were certain conditions that you say like, oh, I was not able to help that situation. There was another problem in the network that was out of my control, and therefore it was detected here as not being available, my service, but it was not my fault. So I agree with the customer that maybe we need to fix this here in that system. Well, if you go to the outage list, you will see that all the outages that are being tracked, we did track before a couple of small outages and a larger one in the previous window, so that's not in the current window anymore. And we have one which is in the current window, and it's 17 seconds. Well, let me open that up a little bit bigger. So I do have the possibility here to define a correction on that 17. And I can say, oh, I agreed with the customer that those 17 seconds, well, actually, it was not really my problem or only half of it. Let's do a correction on there of 10 seconds, minute out, 10 seconds. Okay, let's apply that. So I deduct 10 seconds and now my violation is only 7 seconds anymore. And if I go back to my main view, I'm again compliant, still degraded, of course. I'm again compliant. My availability increased again. I'm still not breached yet because I made a correction on an outage. So you do still see all the outages that, here. You can delete all the outages. They are automatically removed here after time to keep outages, how many months, like 3 months, for instance, you keep your outages. So this list is automatically keeping track of the last 3 months as you define here. So those outages are automatically cleaned out, but you do have a nice tracking of what happens, and you even have a correction you can do and a motivation you can add there. I called the customer, for instance, to agree on something, and you have some reference to a ticket or something like that. So that's the SLA that tracks your availability, allows to see all those outages and nice details around that. And at the end of the month, have a nice overview with all of my services and how I performed. So also on the alarm console, I can see some alarms happening on SLAs and pointing out which services need greater attention because they have already been impacted by outages. So if I have 2 services, both are going into alarm. If one SLA is already bad and the other one is still good, I first gonna take a look at the one that already had some bad conditions previously because I have less time left there. So that's that history perspective that an SLA adds to your system. Okay, so that was what I wanted to talk about with the SLAs. They are adding that nice view on there to keep track of your availability. And if you are still compliant, the full outage list is there, and it's going to generate alarms whenever it is needed or whenever you define it in the alarm templates. The exercise, you can do that by yourselves. It is a little bit the same as we already did during the demonstrations here. So it's about creating a new view, adding some items in there, creating a service with some main and backup, but we already did a little bit more than that even. So I think we have already some quite good exercises finished here. So this was the views, services, and SLAs we can add on top of our elements. So the foundation is the building blocks, all the elements to get the data in there. Then we need to keep it a little bit organized in our view structure, and maybe we want to add that service perspective on top of it, which could be associated with some SLAs to see our availability of our services over time. So that's adding those additional layers on top of the elements that we have been discovering in this final module of the configurator level 1. So with this, we conclude the configurator level 1, allowing you to build the foundation of the system with elements, views, services, and SLAs, and everything around it. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you can also join the level 2